The morning alarm buzzed at exactly 6:30. Hannah woke instantly, her body moving from sleep to full awareness in seconds. 3 years of military life had trained her well. She sat up on her narrow bed and looked around the small room they had given her at the academy. Everything was too clean, too quiet. The walls were painted a soft blue color that was supposed to be calming. The desk was made of real wood, not the metal surfaces she was used to. Even the window had actual glass instead of the reinforced viewing ports from the ships. Hannah got dressed in the school uniform. The white shirt felt strange against her skin. It was too soft, too delicate. The dark blue skirt seemed pointless when pants would be more practical. She tied her hair back in a simple ponytail and looked at herself in the mirror one more time. The girl looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Walking through the academy halls was like entering a different world. Students moved in groups, laughing and talking about things that seemed incredibly unimportant. Their biggest worry was a test next week or which friend was dating which boy. Hannah remembered when her biggest worry was whether the enemy would attack before dawn. The hallways smelled like floor cleaner and new paint. Everything was bright and colorful, with posters about school events and academic achievements. It was nothing like the gray metal corridors of military bases where every surface served a purpose. Students noticed her immediately. She could feel their eyes following her as she walked. They whispered to each other behind their hands, thinking she could not hear them. But Hannah had learned to pay attention to everything around her. It was how soldiers stayed alive. Is that her, one girl whispered to her friend. The war girl, another voice said quietly. I heard she killed dozens of aliens with just her bare hands. My mom says they did experiments on the child soldiers, made them stronger and faster. She looks normal to me. That makes her more dangerous. Hannah kept walking, her face showing nothing. She had learned long ago not to react to what people said about her, but inside she felt tired. The war was over. She just wanted to be a normal student and learn normal things, but these people would never let her forget what she had been. Her first class was Advanced Galactic History. The classroom was much nicer than any learning space she had seen before. The desks were arranged in a circle instead of rows. Large windows let in natural sunlight. Professor Lee stood at the front, shuffling through his notes with nervous energy. Good morning, class, Professor Lee said as students took their seats. Today we will discuss the early days of human contact with alien civilizations. This was a time of great hope and optimism about our place in the galaxy. Hannah sat in the back corner, the same position she would choose in any tactical situation. It gave her a clear view of all exits and kept potential threats in front of her. Some habits were hard to break. The professor talked about the first peaceful meetings between humans and aliens. He described trade agreements and cultural exchanges. He made it sound like a wonderful time when everyone got along perfectly. Hannah knew better. She had seen what happened when that peaceful time ended. The aliens initially saw humans as inferior. Professor Lee continued. Our technology was primitive compared to theirs. They thought we would be easy to control or eliminate if necessary. A boy named Taemin raised his hand. Professor, why did the aliens change their minds about attacking us? Professor Lee looked uncomfortable. His eyes flicked toward Hannah for just a moment. Well, that is a complex topic. Perhaps we should focus on the earlier period of cooperation. But I want to know about the war, Taemin pressed. My father says the aliens were shocked by how well humans fought. They did not expect us to be so violent. The classroom became very quiet. Everyone was looking at Hannah now, waiting to see what she would do. She could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Professor Lee cleared his throat. Miss Kim, perhaps you could share your perspective on the early contact period. It was not really a question. It was a test. Everyone wanted to see if the war veteran would break down or lose control. They wanted to see what kind of monster the military had created. Hannah stood up slowly. Her movements were precise and controlled, like a machine designed for efficiency. The early contact period was built on false assumptions, she said in a calm voice. The aliens assumed humans would follow the same patterns as other species they had conquered. They believed superior technology meant automatic victory. And what changed their minds? Professor Lee asked quietly. They learned that humans do not surrender easily. When they attacked our colonies, they expected quick victories. Instead, they found people who fought back with whatever weapons they could find. Farmers with hunting rifles, children throwing rocks, grandparents building bombs in their basements. The classroom was completely silent now. The aliens had better ships and better weapons, Hana continued, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to give up. They had never fought people who would rather die than submit. That is what changed their minds. Taemin shifted in his seat. But surely the military training made the difference. The child soldiers like you. Hana turned to look at him directly. The boy was trying to sound casual, but she could see the nervous energy in his posture. He was fishing for information, trying to get her to reveal something about the military programs. Military training helped, she admitted, but the real difference was not the training. It was the choice. Every human who fought in that war chose to fight. No one forced them. No one threatened them. They fought because they believed their families and their future were worth protecting. Even the children. A girl named So Young asked from the front row. Hana looked at her for a long moment. So Young was probably the same age Hana had been when she first enlisted. But this girl had never seen violence or hunger or fear. She had never had to make the choice between safety and duty. Especially the children, Hana said finally. Because we knew we were fighting for the chance to grow up in a free world instead of an alien slave colony. Professor Lee was sweating now. This was clearly not the kind of discussion he had planned for his class. Perhaps we should return to our textbook material. But Taemin was not finished. Is it true that child soldiers were given genetic enhancements? Made stronger and faster than normal humans? Hana saw what he was really asking. He wanted to know if she was still human or if she had been turned into something else. It was the same question she saw in everyone's eyes when they looked at her. The only enhancement any of us received was experience, she said. We learned to survive in situations that would kill most people. We learned to make decisions quickly and live with the consequences. We learned that sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice. She sat back down, indicating that the conversation was over, but she could feel the tension in the room. These students were afraid of her, but they were also fascinated. She represented something they could not understand, a life lived outside their safe, comfortable world. The rest of the class passed in uncomfortable silence. Professor Lee rushed through his prepared lesson about trade routes and diplomatic protocols. Students took notes and avoided looking at Hana directly. When the bell finally rang, everyone hurried to pack their things and leave. Hana was the last to leave. As she gathered her books, Professor Lee approached her desk. "Miss Kim," he said quietly, "I hope you understand that this is a difficult transition for everyone. The other students have never met anyone with your background. They are curious, but also worried." "Worried about what?" Hana asked. Professor Lee looked around to make sure they were alone. "They are worried that you might not be able to adjust to civilian life. That the military conditioning might make you dangerous in a school environment." Hana studied his face. The professor was genuinely concerned, but he was also scared. He was trying to be kind while also delivering a warning. "Professor Lee," she said calmly, "I spent 3 years protecting people who could not protect themselves. I have never hurt anyone who was not trying to kill me or my fellow soldiers. The war is over. I have no interest in hurting children who are only guilty of being sheltered and ignorant." The professor looked relieved. "I am glad to hear that. But perhaps in future discussions you could be less intense in your responses. Some of the students found your comments disturbing." Hana picked up her bag and walked toward the door. "Professor, if my comments about choosing to fight for freedom disturb them, they are going to have a very difficult time in the real world." She left him standing there and walked out into the hallway. The morning had taught her several important things. First, the other students saw her as either a dangerous weapon or an interesting curiosity. Second, the teachers were more afraid of her than the students were. Third, everyone expected her to eventually break down or lose control. They were all wrong, but she decided not to correct them yet. Sometimes it was better to let people underestimate you. She had learned that lesson well during the war. The next class would be even more challenging. But Hana had survived worse things than curious teenagers and nervous teachers. She would survive this too. The lunch bell rang at exactly 12:15. Hana followed the stream of students toward the cafeteria, observing their behavior like she once studied enemy movement patterns. They moved in groups, never alone, always talking and laughing about things that seemed to have no real importance. The cafeteria was enormous compared to military mess halls. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, and large windows showed the academy gardens outside. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each one claiming a different group of students. Even without signs or announcements, everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Hana got in line for food, picking up a tray and moving through the serving area. The choices were overwhelming. During the war, meals were simple and practical. Protein bars, vitamin supplements, and whatever fresh food could be grown in the ship gardens. Here, students could choose from dozens of different options. She selected a basic meal of rice, vegetables, and synthetic protein that reminded her of military rations. Simple food was easier to digest, and her stomach still had trouble with rich or complicated meals. Too many years of eating whatever was available had trained her body to expect less. With her tray in hand, Hana looked around the cafeteria. The social structure was immediately obvious to her trained eye. Near the window sat the children of government officials and corporate executives. Their clothes were perfectly tailored, their hair styled by expensive professionals. They spoke in quiet voices about parties and vacation plans. In the center of the room were the academic achievers. These students earned their status through test scores and competition victories. They discussed homework assignments and upcoming exams with serious intensity. Their uniforms were clean but not expensive, and they carried themselves with the confidence of people who worked hard for their success. Along the walls sat smaller groups of students who did not fit into the main categories. Artists, athletes from less popular sports, and scholarship students who could not afford the social activities that built friendships among the wealthy families. Hana walked toward an empty table in a corner, calculating the best position for observation and quick exit if needed. But before she could sit down, a girl appeared beside her as if from nowhere. "Excuse me," the girl said in a voice that carried across the cafeteria. "This section is reserved for senior class officers." Hana looked at the girl more carefully. She was tall and perfectly groomed with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Her uniform was modified with expensive accessories that somehow stayed within school rules, while clearly showing her wealth. This was someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "I do not see any signs indicating reserved seating," Hana replied calmly, setting her tray down anyway. The girl's eyes flashed with surprise and anger. Students nearby began to notice the confrontation, pulling out their personal recording devices to capture whatever happened next. The cafeteria noise level dropped as more people turned to watch. "My name is Eugene Park," the girl announced as if this information should mean something important. "My father is Director Park of the Colonial Development Authority. He was one of the primary negotiators who ended your little war and brought peace to the galaxy." Hana took a bite of her rice while studying Eugene's face. The girl was used to intimidating people with her family connections. Her posture suggested someone who had never faced real opposition or consequences for her actions. "Your father negotiated from a position of strength that soldiers created for him," Hana said after swallowing her food. "But please tell me more about how difficult those negotiations must have been from his comfortable office on Earth." Eugene's face turned red with embarrassment and rage. Several students around them gasped at the bold response. No one ever challenged Eugene directly, especially not a new student with no social connections. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Eugene demanded, her voice rising. "I could have you expelled from this academy with a single call to the administration." "I am talking to a child who has never faced any real challenges in her life," Hana replied, in the same calm tone. "Someone who thinks her father's job makes her important, even though she has never accomplished anything on her own." The cafeteria was almost completely quiet now. Students held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Some looked excited by the drama, while others seemed worried about the potential consequences. Eugene stepped closer to the table, her hands shaking with anger. "You think you are special because you killed some aliens. You think being a child soldier makes you better than us, but you are nothing but a broken tool that outlived its usefulness. We know how to function in civilized society. You are just a damaged freak who does not belong here." The words hit Hana like physical blows, not because they were untrue, but because they contained enough truth to hurt. She was damaged. She did struggle with civilian life. She was different from these students in ways that could never be fixed or hidden. For a moment, the cafeteria faded away. Hana saw Eugene not as a spoiled teenager, but as a target to be eliminated. Her heart rate increased and her muscles tensed for action. Every combat instinct told her to neutralize the threat quickly and efficiently. She could imagine exactly how it would happen. One quick movement to grab Eugen's wrist. A simple throw that would put the girl on the floor. Maybe apply pressure to specific nerve points that would cause pain without permanent damage. Show everyone in the cafeteria exactly what a trained killer could do when pushed too far. The fantasy lasted only seconds before Hana forced herself back to reality. These were not enemy soldiers. This was not a battlefield. Eugen was just a spoiled child lashing out at something she could not understand. Hurting her would prove every terrible thing people believed about former child soldiers. Hana took another bite of her rice and chewed slowly, giving herself time to regain control. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and calm. "You are right about some things," she said. "I am broken in ways that will never completely heal. I do have trouble fitting into civilized society. Being a soldier changes you in permanent ways." Eugen looked surprised by this admission. She had expected anger or violence, not honesty. "But you are wrong about the important things," Hana continued. "I do not think I am better than you because I fought in the war. I think I am different from you because I chose to fight for something bigger than myself. I chose to protect people I had never met because it was the right thing to do." She stood up slowly, her movements controlled and precise. Students nearby leaned back instinctively, sensing the potential for violence even though Hana had made no threatening gestures. "You ask what makes me special," Hana said, looking directly into Eugen's eyes. "It is not the training or the combat experience. It is the knowledge that when everything goes wrong, when the safe, comfortable world falls apart, I will still be standing. I will still be fighting for what matters. The question is, what will you do when your father's name and your family's money cannot protect you anymore?" Eugen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her with complete honesty instead of fear or false respect. She did not know how to handle it. Hana picked up her tray and walked away, leaving Eugen standing alone while the entire cafeteria watched. As she moved toward the dish return area, conversation slowly resumed around her. But she could feel eyes following her movement, and she heard whispered discussions about what had just happened. Near the exit, she noticed a boy sitting alone at a small table. Unlike the others, he was not staring at her or whispering to friends. Instead, he was reading a book about military history while eating his lunch. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded slightly before returning to his reading. Something about his quiet presence reminded Hana of the young recruits she had mentored during the war. Serious, thoughtful, and more interested in understanding the world than impressing their peers. As she left the cafeteria, Hana realized that the real battle was just beginning. Eugen would not forget this public embarrassment. Someone with her resources and connections would find ways to make Hana's life much more difficult. But for now, she had established an important fact. She was not afraid of them, and she would not be easily intimidated. The war had taught her to face much worse enemies than spoiled teenagers with influential parents. Whatever came next, she would handle it the same way she had handled everything else. One battle at a time, with careful planning and absolute determination to survive. The lunch bell rang at exactly 12:15. Hana followed the stream of students toward the cafeteria, observing their behavior like she once studied enemy movement patterns. They moved in groups, never alone, always talking and laughing about things that seemed to have no real importance. The cafeteria was enormous compared to military mess halls. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, and large windows showed the academy gardens outside. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each one claiming a different group of students. Even without signs or announcements, everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Hana got in line for food, picking up a tray and moving through the serving area. The choices were overwhelming. During the war, meals were simple and practical. Protein bars, vitamin supplements, and whatever fresh food could be grown in the ship gardens. Here, students could choose from dozens of different options. She selected a basic meal of rice, vegetables, and synthetic protein that reminded her of military rations. Simple food was easier to digest, and her stomach still had trouble with rich or complicated meals. Too many years of eating whatever was available had trained her body to expect less. With her tray in hand, Hana looked around the cafeteria. The social structure was immediately obvious to her trained eye. Near the window sat the children of government officials and corporate executives. Their clothes were perfectly tailored, their hair styled by expensive professionals. They spoke in quiet voices about parties and vacation plans. In the center of the room were the academic achievers. These students earned their status through test scores and competition victories. They discussed homework assignments and upcoming exams with serious intensity. Their uniforms were clean but not expensive, and they carried themselves with the confidence of people who worked hard for their success. Along the wall sat smaller groups of students who did not fit into the main categories. Artists, athletes from less popular sports, and scholarship students who could not afford the social activities that built friendships among the wealthy families. Hannah walked toward an empty table in a corner, calculating the best position for observation and quick exit if needed, but before she could sit down, a girl appeared beside her as if from nowhere. "Excuse me," the girl said in a voice that carried across the cafeteria. "This section is reserved for senior class officers." Hannah looked at the girl more carefully. She was tall and perfectly groomed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Her uniform was modified with expensive accessories that somehow stayed within school rules, while clearly showing her wealth. This was someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "I do not see any signs indicating reserved seating," Hannah replied calmly, setting her tray down anyway. The girl's eyes flashed with surprise and anger. Students nearby began to notice the confrontation, pulling out their personal recording devices to capture whatever happened next. The cafeteria noise level dropped as more people turned to watch. "My name is Eugene Park," the girl announced as if this information should mean something important. "My father is Director Park of the Colonial Development Authority. He was one of the primary negotiators who ended your little war and brought peace to the galaxy." Hannah took a bite of her rice while studying Eugene's face. The girl was used to intimidating people with her family connections. Her posture suggested someone who had never faced real opposition or consequences for her actions. "Your father negotiated from a position of strength that soldiers created for him," Hannah said after swallowing her food. "But please tell me more about how difficult those negotiations must have been from his comfortable office on Earth." Eugene's face turned red with embarrassment and rage. Several students around them gasped at the bold response. No one ever challenged Eugene directly, especially not a new student with no social connections. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Eugene demanded, her voice rising. "I could have you expelled from this academy with a single call to the administration." "I am talking to a child who has never faced any real challenges in her life," Hannah replied in the same calm tone. "Someone who thinks her father's job makes her important, even though she has never accomplished anything on her own." The cafeteria was almost completely quiet now. Students held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Some looked excited by the drama, while others seemed worried about the potential consequences. Eugene stepped closer to the table, her hands shaking with anger. "You think you are special because you killed some aliens. You think being a child soldier makes you better than us, but you are nothing but a broken tool that outlived its usefulness. We know how to function in civilized society. You are just a damaged freak who does not belong here." The words hit Hannah like physical blows, not because they were untrue, but because they contained enough truth to hurt. She was damaged. She did struggle with civilian life. She was different from these students in ways that could never be fixed or hidden. For a moment, the cafeteria faded away. Hannah saw Eugene not as a spoiled teenager, but as a target to be eliminated. Her heart rate increased and her muscles tensed for action. Every combat instinct told her to neutralize the threat quickly and efficiently. She could imagine exactly how it would happen. One quick movement to grab Eugene's wrist. A simple throw that would put the girl on the floor. Maybe apply pressure to specific nerve points that would cause pain without permanent damage. Show everyone in the cafeteria exactly what a trained killer could do when pushed too far. The fantasy lasted only seconds before Hannah forced herself back to reality. These were not enemy soldiers. This was not a battlefield. Eugene was just a spoiled child lashing out at something she could not understand. Hurting her would prove every terrible thing people believed about former child soldiers. Hannah took another bite of her rice and chewed slowly, giving herself time to regain control. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and calm. "You are right about some things," she said. "I am broken in ways that will never completely heal. I do have trouble fitting into civilized society. Being a soldier changes you in permanent ways." Eugene looked surprised by this admission. She had expected anger or violence, not honesty. "But you are wrong about the important things," Hannah continued. I do not think I am better than you because I fought in the war. I think I am different from you because I chose to fight for something bigger than myself. I chose to protect people I had never met because it was the right thing to do. She stood up slowly, her movements controlled and precise. Students nearby leaned back instinctively, sensing the potential for violence even though Hana had made no threatening gestures. You ask what makes me special, Hana said, looking directly into Yujin's eyes. It is not the training or the combat experience. It is the knowledge that when everything goes wrong, when the safe, comfortable world falls apart, I will still be standing. I will still be fighting for what matters. The question is, what will you do when your father's name and your family's money cannot protect you anymore? Yujin opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her with complete honesty, instead of fear or false respect. She did not know how to handle it. Hana picked up her tray and walked away, leaving Yujin standing alone while the entire cafeteria watched. As she moved toward the dish return area, conversation slowly resumed around her. But she could feel eyes following her movement, and she heard whispered discussions about what had just happened. Near the exit, she noticed a boy sitting alone at a small table. Unlike the others, he was not staring at her or whispering to friends. Instead, he was reading a book about military history while eating his lunch. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded slightly before returning to his reading. Something about his quiet presence reminded Hana of the young recruits she had mentored during the war. Serious, thoughtful, and more interested in understanding the world than impressing their peers. As she left the cafeteria, Hana realized that the real battle was just beginning. Yujin would not forget this public embarrassment. Someone with her resources and connections would find ways to make Hana's life much more difficult. But for now, she had established an important fact. She was not afraid of them, and she would not be easily intimidated. The war had taught her to face much worse enemies than spoiled teenagers with influential parents. Whatever came next, she would handle it the same way she had handled everything else, one battle at a time, with careful planning and absolute determination to survive. The attacks began 3 days after the cafeteria incident. Hana discovered the first one when she opened her locker that morning. Someone had sprayed red paint across her books and uniform. Words like killer and freak were written in sloppy letters on the metal walls inside. Hana stared at the damage for a moment, then began cleaning it up. The paint was still wet, which meant it had happened recently, probably during the early morning hours when the hallways were empty. She made mental notes about security cameras and access points while she worked. Other students walked past, some stopping to stare at the vandalism. A few looked shocked or sympathetic, but most seemed either amused or satisfied. Word traveled fast in a school environment, and everyone knew about her confrontation with Yujin. That is terrible, said a soft voice behind her. Hana turned to see the boy from the cafeteria, the one who had been reading the military history book. He was shorter than most students his age, with messy hair and clothes that looked like they came from a basic store rather than expensive designers. It is just paint, Hana replied, continuing to clean. I have seen worse things. The boy stepped closer, lowering his voice. My name is Junho. I saw what happened in the cafeteria yesterday. Yujin does not usually lose arguments like that. I noticed you were reading about military tactics, Hana said, studying his face. Most students here seem more interested in social media and shopping. Junho smiled slightly. My father was a communications analyst during the war. He brought work home sometimes. I learned a few things about how conflicts really work. And what did you learn? That the first attack is never the last one. Yujin has resources and connections that most people cannot fight against. She will escalate until she gets what she wants. Hana finished cleaning her locker and gathered the salvageable books. What does she want? To prove that she is still in control. You embarrassed her in front of the entire school. She needs to restore her reputation by destroying yours. Over the next week, Junho proved to be correct. The attacks came in waves, each one more sophisticated than the last. Someone hacked into Hana's student account and changed her class schedules, causing her to miss important assignments. Her personal communications were intercepted and private messages appeared on school bulletin boards. The messages were carefully edited to make her sound unstable and dangerous. A note to her former squad leader about having trouble sleeping became evidence that she was planning violence. A joke about military food being terrible was twisted into complaints about civilian life being too soft for her. Teachers began treating her differently. They spoke to her in careful, gentle voices as if she might explode at any moment. Some professors started avoiding calling on her in class discussions. The school counselor requested weekly meetings to check on her mental health. "Are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself or others?" the counselor asked during one of these sessions. "No more than usual," Hannah replied honestly. The counselor looked alarmed. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, I think about tactical situations and potential threats because that is how I was trained. But I have no plans to hurt anyone who is not trying to hurt me. But surely you understand why people might be concerned. Your background is quite unusual for someone your age." Hannah studied the counselor's face. The woman was genuinely trying to help, but she was also documenting everything for official reports. Every word Hannah said could be used as evidence that she was unfit for civilian education. "What would you like me to say?" Hannah asked. "That 3 years of war had no effect on me. That I am exactly the same as students who have never seen violence or death. Would lying make you feel better about having me here?" The counselor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I just want to make sure you are getting the support you need for a successful transition. The support I need is to be treated like a normal student instead of a dangerous animal in a cage. But I understand that is not possible here." The worst attack came 2 weeks later. Someone had obtained copies of her military psychiatric evaluations and medical records. Documents that should have been classified and confidential were suddenly circulating throughout the school network. The files contained detailed descriptions of her combat experiences, her struggles with survivor guilt, and her ongoing treatment for war-related trauma. Private conversations with military therapists were presented as evidence of mental instability. Hannah found out when students started approaching her with fake sympathy and cruel questions. "Is it true you have nightmares about dead aliens?" one girl asked with false concern. "The reports say you feel guilty about surviving when your friends died." "That must be so hard for you," another student added with obvious satisfaction. "I read that you cannot sleep without medication. How embarrassing that must be." The violation felt worse than any physical attack. These were her most private thoughts and fears, shared with medical professionals who had promised confidentiality. Now they were entertainment for bored teenagers who had never experienced real loss or trauma. That afternoon, Hannah sat alone in her dorm room, staring at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she seriously considered leaving. Maybe the integration protocol was wrong. Maybe former child soldiers could not successfully transition to civilian life. A soft knock interrupted her dark thoughts. Junho stood in her doorway, carrying a data pad and wearing an expression of serious determination. "I have been analyzing the harassment patterns," he said without introduction. "Someone is coordinating these attacks with military-level precision." Hannah gestured for him to enter. "What do you mean?" Junho sat down and activated his data pad, showing her charts and timelines he had compiled. "Look at the escalation pattern. First physical vandalism to test security response, then digital attacks to probe your personal networks, finally psychological warfare using classified information. You think this is more than just Eugene being angry? I think Eugene is being used by adults who want you gone from this school. Someone with serious resources obtained your military files. That requires government-level access." Hannah studied the information Junho had gathered. His analysis was thorough and professional, showing skills that went far beyond what most students learned in basic computer classes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Junho was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be different. My father was just a communications analyst, but he came home changed after the war. People treated him like he was broken, like he could not handle normal life anymore. What happened to him? He got better eventually. But it took time, and it took people who believed in him instead of just being afraid of him." Hannah felt something she had not experienced since arriving at the academy. Hope. For the first time, someone was offering to stand with her instead of against her. "So what do you suggest we do?" Junho smiled, and she saw something familiar in his expression. It was the look of someone preparing for battle, someone who understood that sometimes you had to fight back to survive. "We gather intelligence first, find out who is really behind this campaign and what they hope to accomplish. Then we plan a counterattack that uses their own methods against them." "You sound like a soldier." I learned from the best teacher available, someone who fought real battles and won them. Hana looked at the boy who had chosen to become her ally. He was young and inexperienced, but he had something more important than training or equipment. He had courage and loyalty, the same qualities that had made human soldiers so effective against superior alien forces. "All right," she said finally. "Let's fight back. But we do it smart and we do it right." Junho nodded seriously. "Understood. What are our objectives? First, we protect ourselves and gather evidence. Second, we identify the real enemy. Third, we make sure this never happens to another veteran student. And if we succeed?" Hana smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then we prove that humans are still dangerous even when the battlefield is a high school." Outside her window, the academy grounds were peaceful and quiet. But inside the building, a new kind of war was beginning. This time, Hana would not be fighting alone. Junho's plan began with understanding the enemy. He spent 3 days mapping the school's digital network, tracing communication patterns and identifying who had access to what information. His father had taught him that information was the most powerful weapon in any conflict. "Look at this," Junho said, showing Hana his findings in the empty computer lab late one evening. "The attack on your medical records came from inside the school administration network. Someone with high-level access downloaded those files and distributed them." Hana studied the data on his screen. "Can you tell who it was?" "Not yet, but I can tell you when it happened and which terminal was used. The timing matches perfectly with Yujin's request to meet with her father about school security concerns." "You think her father is involved?" Junho pulled up another screen showing communication logs. "I think several parents are involved. They have been meeting regularly since you arrived at the academy. The topics include student safety, academic standards, and protecting the school's reputation." Hana felt familiar anger building in her chest. Adults who had never risked anything for humanity's survival were now working together to destroy a 17-year-old girl who had fought to protect their comfortable lives. "They are afraid," she said, quietly. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that having a former child soldier at their elite academy will hurt their children's futures. Wealthy families do not want their kids going to the same school as someone they consider damaged goods." Junho saved his work and turned to face her. "Then we need to change the narrative. Instead of letting them define who you are, we show everyone the truth." "And what is the truth?" "That you are a hero who sacrificed her childhood to protect humanity. That you represent the best of what humans can be when facing impossible odds. That anyone trying to destroy you is attacking everything our species fought for." Over the next week, they worked together to build their counterattack. Junho used his technical skills to gather evidence while Hana provided tactical guidance. She taught him how to think like a soldier, to plan for multiple scenarios and always have backup options. "Military planning is about reducing uncertainty," she explained as they reviewed their strategy. "You cannot control what the enemy does, but you can prepare for every possibility." They discovered that the harassment campaign was more organized than anyone realized. A group of parents had formed an unofficial committee dedicated to removing Hana from the academy. They had hired private investigators to dig into her background and were coordinating with school administrators to build a case for her expulsion. "They are planning something big," Junho warned after intercepting several encrypted messages. "Next week is the Excellence Day ceremony. They want to use that event to publicly demand your removal." "What kind of evidence do they have?" "Mostly lies and distorted facts. But they have prepared a presentation showing selected incidents from your military service, taken completely out of context. They make it look like you were an unstable killer who enjoyed violence." Hana felt cold rage settling in her stomach. These people were not just attacking her personally. They were attacking the memory of every human who had died in the war, turning their sacrifice into something ugly and shameful. "We need to beat them at their own game," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "They want to use Excellence Day to destroy me. Instead, we use it to destroy them. We expose everything they have done and show the whole school who the real villains are." Junho looked nervous. "That is a big risk. If we fail, they will definitely get you expelled. And if we do nothing, they will get me expelled anyway. At least this way we fight back." They spent the next 3 days preparing their own presentation. Junho compiled evidence of the harassment campaign, showing the systematic nature of the attacks and the involvement of parents and administrators. Hana worked on her own statement, something that would cut through the lies and show people the truth about what the war had really been like. I want them to understand what we were fighting for, she told Junho as she practiced her speech. Not just human survival, but human values. The idea that people should be judged by their actions, not their background. The belief that everyone deserves a chance to build a better life. You sound like a politician. Hana laughed, a sound that surprised them both. I sound like someone who has learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought with words instead of weapons. The night before Excellence Day, they made final preparations. Junho had created a multimedia presentation that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Hana had written a speech that she hoped would remind people why the war had been worth fighting. Are you ready for this? Junho asked as they reviewed everything one last time. I have been ready since the first day I arrived here, Hana replied. The question is whether this school is ready for the truth. As they left the computer lab, Hana felt the same focused calm she had experienced before major battles during the war. Tomorrow would determine not just her future, but the future of every veteran trying to rebuild their life in civilian society. Yujin and her allies thought they were fighting a damaged ex-soldier who would break under pressure. They had no idea they were about to face someone who had learned that the most dangerous humans were not the ones who enjoyed fighting, but the ones who fought for something bigger than themselves. The war had taught Hana many lessons, but the most important one was this. Humans were never more dangerous than when they were protecting what they loved. Tomorrow she would be fighting to protect every veteran who came after her, every young person who had sacrificed for humanity's future. She had survived 3 years of interstellar warfare. She would survive this too. And when it was over, everyone would understand exactly why alien civilizations had learned to fear human determination. Not because humans were naturally violent, but because they never gave up when something important was at stake. Tomorrow would be the final battle of her war. And she intended to win it. Excellence Day arrived with perfect weather and high expectations. The Academy's main auditorium was filled with students, parents, faculty, and important guests from the government and corporate world. Everyone dressed in their finest clothes, ready to celebrate academic achievements and social success. Hana sat in the back row, wearing her standard school uniform, while others around her displayed expensive designer modifications. She had chosen simplicity on purpose. Today was not about fashion or wealth. It was about truth. Yujin sat in the front section with her parents and their influential friends. Her father, Director Park, looked exactly like Hana had imagined. Perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The ceremony began with traditional speeches about academic excellence and bright futures. Teachers presented awards to outstanding students while proud parents recorded everything on their personal devices. It all seemed very normal and peaceful. Hana knew better. This was the calm before a storm that would change everything. Junho sat 3 rows ahead of her, his laptop ready and connected to the auditorium's presentation system. They had tested everything multiple times, but technology could always fail at the worst moment. Backup plans were essential in any military operation. Principal Wang took the stage to introduce the special presentations. Today we also have some important discussions about maintaining our academy's standards and ensuring a safe learning environment for all students. Yujin's mother stood up first, walking to the podium with practiced grace. She was everything Hana was not, elegant, sophisticated, and completely comfortable speaking to powerful people. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Park began, we must address a serious concern about student safety and academic integrity. Recently, our academy admitted a student whose background raises significant questions about her ability to integrate into our educational community. She activated her own presentation, showing carefully edited clips from news reports about the war. The images focused on destruction and violence, with dramatic narration about the psychological damage suffered by child soldiers. While we all respect the service of our military personnel, Mrs. Park continued, we must ask whether someone trained as a weapon of war can truly adapt to civilian education. The evidence suggests that former child soldiers struggle with aggression, social integration, and emotional stability. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some parents nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable with the direct attack. Students whispered to each other, many turning to look at Hana in the back row. Mrs. Park showed selected quotes from Hana's psychiatric evaluations, presenting them as evidence of dangerous instability. She described the harassment incidents as natural reactions to having a volatile individual in the school environment. For the safety of our children and the reputation of our institution, Mrs. Park concluded, we respectfully request that this student be transferred to a facility better equipped to handle her special needs. The applause was polite but uncertain. Many people seemed convinced by the professional presentation, but others looked troubled by the obvious attempt to remove a student who had done nothing wrong. Principal Wang looked nervous as he returned to the podium. Thank you, Mrs. Park. Now I believe another student has requested time to respond to these concerns. Junho stood up and walked toward the stage, carrying his laptop and a small remote control. Hana felt her heart rate increase. Everything depended on the next few minutes. My name is Junho, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. I am a second-year student here, and I have been researching the treatment of veteran students at our academy. He connected his laptop and activated his presentation. The first slide showed a timeline of harassment incidents targeting Hana, with dates, locations, and evidence of coordination. What you just heard was not a concerned request for student safety, Junho continued. It was the final phase of a systematic campaign to remove a student who embarrassed certain influential families. The audience stirred uncomfortably as Junho presented evidence of the organized harassment. He showed communication logs between parents, documentation of the medical record theft, and proof that adults had coordinated attacks on a teenage girl. These adults used their resources and connections to torture someone who fought to protect humanity's future, Junho said, his voice growing stronger. They violated her privacy, spread lies about her mental health, and tried to destroy her reputation because they were afraid of what she represented. Director Park stood up angrily. This is outrageous. That boy is making serious accusations without proof. The proof is all here, Junho replied calmly, displaying the digital evidence on the large screen. Would you like me to show the encrypted messages where you and 4 other parents planned this campaign? Or perhaps the access logs showing when your administrative contacts downloaded classified military files? The auditorium erupted in shocked conversations. Parents who had supported the removal effort suddenly looked worried about their own involvement being exposed. Students stared at their influential families with new understanding. Principal Wang tried to restore order. Perhaps we should move this discussion to a private meeting. No, said a clear voice from the back of the auditorium. Everyone turned to see Hana standing up, her posture straight and confident. She walked down the aisle toward the stage, her movements precise and controlled. The auditorium fell completely silent. If we are going to discuss my fitness for civilian education, Hana said as she reached the podium, then everyone should hear the complete truth. She faced the audience, looking directly at the people who had tried to destroy her. Her voice was calm and steady, carrying the authority of someone who had faced much worse enemies than this. You have heard many things about me today, some true, some false, all presented without context. Let me give you the context you need. Hana began to speak about the war not as a distant historical event but as a lived experience. She described the choice faced by young humans when alien forces attacked their colonies: fight back with whatever they had or watch their families become slaves in an alien empire. I was 14 when I enlisted, she said simply, not because anyone forced me, but because I understood what we were fighting for. The right to determine our own future, the chance for humanity to remain free. She talked about the battles, the losses, and the victories that had surprised the galaxy, but most importantly, she talked about why they had fought and what they had hoped to achieve. We did not fight because we enjoyed violence. We fought because we believed in something worth protecting: human dignity, human freedom. The idea that people should be judged by their character, not their circumstances. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even Yujin's supporters seemed transfixed by Hana's words. When the war ended, we were told to integrate into civilian society, to become normal students and build normal lives. But some of you decided that we could never be normal, that our experiences made us too dangerous for your children to be around. Hana's gaze found Director Park in the audience. You negotiated peace from a position of strength that soldiers like me created for you. But when we asked for the chance to build civilian lives, you decided we were too broken to deserve that opportunity. She turned to address the entire audience. You want to know if I am dangerous? You want to know if former child soldiers can integrate into civilian society? Let me answer those questions directly. Yes, I am dangerous, but not in the way you think. I am dangerous because I remember what we fought for. I am dangerous because I will not let you turn our sacrifice into something shameful. I am dangerous because I refuse to accept that trauma makes someone worthless. The power in her voice was undeniable. This was not a broken teenager begging for acceptance. This was a young woman who had faced the worst the galaxy could offer and emerged stronger. You call me a weapon that outlived its usefulness. But weapons destroy things. I want to build things. I want to build a future where veteran students are supported instead of attacked, where young people who sacrificed for humanity's survival are given the chance to heal and grow. Hannah stepped back from the podium, her message delivered. The auditorium remained silent for a long moment before someone in the middle section began to clap. Others joined in, and soon the applause was overwhelming, but Hannah was not finished yet. She had one more battle to fight. The applause continued for several minutes, but Hannah raised her hand for silence. She was not finished speaking, and everyone could see there was more to come. You asked whether former child soldiers can integrate into civilian society, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. The answer depends entirely on how that society chooses to treat us. She gestured toward Junho, who still stood near the presentation screen. This young man chose to stand with me when everyone else either feared me or tried to destroy me. He saw someone worth defending instead of someone to be eliminated. Then she looked directly at Yujin, who sat frozen in the front row. Others chose to see me as a threat to their comfortable world. They decided that instead of learning from our experiences, they would try to erase us completely. Hannah's voice grew stronger as she continued. But here is what they failed to understand about humans who have survived impossible situations. We do not break easily. We adapt, we learn, we overcome. She turned to address the parents and administrators who had orchestrated the harassment campaign. You used every weapon you had against me. Social pressure, psychological manipulation, violation of privacy, systematic harassment. You coordinated like a military operation to destroy one teenager. Director Park shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly wanting to interrupt but afraid of making things worse. And you failed, Hannah continued. Not because I am superhuman or genetically enhanced, but because you forgot the most important lesson of the war. Humans are most dangerous when they are protecting something they believe in. She gestured to the entire audience. I was not just protecting myself. I was protecting every veteran who will come after me. Every young person who sacrificed for humanity's future, and now wants a chance to build a normal life. The auditorium was completely silent again. Even the youngest students seemed to understand they were witnessing something important. You want to know what makes humans special in the galaxy, Hannah said, her voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow still carried to everyone present. It is not our technology or our weapons. It is our ability to choose who we become, even after terrible things happen to us. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had changed from hostility to respect, from fear to understanding. I chose to become better than the people who hurt me. I chose to fight for principles instead of revenge. I chose to build instead of destroy. That choice is what makes us human. Hannah stepped away from the podium, but she had one final thing to say. The war taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this. When humans work together to protect what matters, we are unstoppable. Today, Junho and I proved that lesson applies to high school auditoriums just as much as alien battlefields. She walked back toward her seat while the audience processed what they had heard. The applause that followed was different from before. It was not just polite recognition, but genuine respect and admiration. Principal Wang returned to the podium, looking shaken but determined. I think we have all learned something important today about the true meaning of courage and character. The administration will be conducting a full investigation into the harassment allegations presented here. He paused, looking directly at the parents who had orchestrated the campaign. Anyone found to have violated student privacy or participated in systematic harassment will face serious consequences, regardless of their position or connections. Director Park and his allies looked pale and angry, but they had no response. The evidence was overwhelming, and public opinion had clearly shifted against them. Over the following weeks, the changes at Sejong Academy were dramatic. 3 administrators were dismissed for their role in the harassment. Several parents faced legal consequences for violating privacy laws. Yujin and her core supporters received formal disciplinary action for their attacks on Hana. But the most important changes were smaller and more personal. Students who had previously avoided Hana began approaching her with genuine curiosity about her experiences. Teachers treated her with respect instead of fear. The school implemented new policies to protect veteran students and provide proper support for their transition to civilian life. Junho became Hana's closest friend and most trusted ally. Other students who had been victims of the academy's social hierarchy found their own voices and began standing up for each other. The toxic culture that had allowed the harassment campaign was slowly being replaced by something better. "So what happens next?" Junho asked, as they sat together in the cafeteria several weeks later. The same table where Yujin had first confronted Hana was now surrounded by students who treated them both with genuine friendship. "We keep fighting the good fight," Hana replied, watching other students interact with easy camaraderie. There are other academies where veteran students face similar problems. Other young people who need someone to stand up for them. Sounds like a mission worth accepting. Hana smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. The best missions usually are. She looked around the cafeteria, seeing it with new eyes. What had once been a battlefield was now just a place where young people gathered to eat lunch and share stories about their lives. The transformation had not happened because the environment changed, but because the people in it chose to be better. That afternoon, Hana received a message from her former squad leader. Other veteran students at different schools had heard about what happened at Sejong Academy. They wanted to know how she had fought back against systematic harassment and won. "Looks like our fight is spreading," she told Junho as she showed him the messages. "Good," he replied. "Some battles are worth sharing." Hana began typing responses, sharing tactical advice and emotional support with young veterans who faced similar challenges. Each message was a small victory against the idea that former child soldiers could not successfully integrate into civilian society. As the sun set outside the academy windows, Hana reflected on everything that had changed since her arrival. She had come here as a broken ex-soldier trying to build a normal life. She was leaving as something much more important. A young woman who understood that normal was not about forgetting the past, but about choosing what to do with the lessons it taught you. The war had made her dangerous, but not in the way her enemies had feared. She was dangerous because she refused to let trauma define her. She was dangerous because she chose to fight for others instead of just herself. She was dangerous because she proved that humans could survive anything and emerge stronger. Junho walked with her toward the dormitory, carrying books about advanced tactics and civilian leadership techniques. "You know what I think," he said as they reached her door. "What?" "I think the galaxy is lucky that humans decided to be protectors instead of conquerors. Because if we ever chose to become an aggressive species, nobody would be able to stop us." Hana laughed, a sound that had become much more common over the past few weeks. "Maybe that is why the integration protocol exists. To make sure we remember what we are fighting for. And what are we fighting for?" She looked back at the academy, where lights were coming on in dormitory windows and students were settling in for another peaceful evening of study and friendship. "The chance for everyone to choose who they become," she said simply. "The opportunity to build something better than what came before. The freedom to protect what matters without losing what makes us human." Junho nodded seriously. "Those sound like goals worth dedicating a life to." "They are," Hana agreed. "And tomorrow we keep working toward them." As she entered her room that night, Hana looked once more at her reflection in the window. The girl looking back at her was still a veteran, still carried scars from the war, still struggled with the transition to civilian life. But she was no longer broken. She was a young woman who had learned that surviving was not enough. You had to survive with your humanity intact, your principles unchanged, and your determination to protect others stronger than ever. The war was over, but the fight for humanity's future continued in classrooms and cafeterias, in the daily choice to be better than circumstances demanded. And in that fight, former child soldiers had an important role to play. They were living proof that humans could face the worst the universe had to offer and still choose hope over despair, compassion over cruelty, and building over destroying. That choice, more than any weapon or technology, was what made humanity truly dangerous. and truly worth protecting.